Here is the Linux Mint installation system desktop. What we have here is the window for the installer. Click Install Linux Mint. Select your language. Select your keyboard layout. Make sure you have the Install Multimedia Codecs box checked.
Basically a 50-50 race, and Hillary Clinton had a 50-50 race. She won the popular vote. I think a couple things. I think Kamala Harris was a good candidate. I don't think she was a great president. In fact, those would have
We're
disabled
going
her
to
very quickly.
partition the drive manually
Put her in a terrible position, and also because of
to
the
allow
issues with
dual boot,
and inflation and
to
immigration
allow
and the
multiple
issues that she's
drives on
facing
your
right now.
system. You're going
But I
to
think
want
the
to
other thing is
manually
is
partition the system.
kind of
You'll have to
moving away
create
from
several
Linux as
partitions,
he kind of underperformed to some degree
including the boot
under Trump.
partition, home partition,
Trump is a
root
Trump machine. I
partition,
mean,
and
they
swap
he
partition.
overperformed in places
And we are
typically
going
where
to
there was
set mount
growth in
points
2020, and it seems
for
like
each
he has been
partition so that they are mounted
in this case.
properly.
And Republicans
If you
certainly
are
have
not
been
dual
talking
booting,
about
you
the
do
fact that
not
they
have
should
multiple
support this
disks,
because
you can explore these other options which will
the Republicans
erase
are
your
basically
existing
this
system.
is not someone where you
We
plug
want
in
to select
the
something
Republican
else for
system. This is
installation
not
type.
2004, 2005 with potential
It is going to
issues.
find our disks,
And Donald Trump
and we are going to now go through partitioning these
turn out magic to
disks for our new Linux Mint artificial intelligence
for 3 straight elections,
focused
will be
system.
winding down. And
So we need to find the drive for sure, the right drive that we want to install to. So what we want to do is pull up the disks tool, and this disks tool will allow us to find the right disk name. It will start with slash dev, most likely, SDC. Could be SDA, SDB. Mine, I think, is SDC today for the drive I want to work with. And we'll use this disks tool to delete the old partitions on the disk. So that's why you want to make sure you have the right disk. We are going to delete my existing Linux install. Hopefully this is the last time. Okay, well, it's getting conflicted because we have two tools open, I think. We're going to use this tool. What you want to do is delete your old partitions. So we're going to use the installer tool, delete my SDC or corresponding drive name or device name with path. You want to delete all of the partitions on it, and we are going to now make new partitions for the Linux Mint system. And this allows you to dual boot more easily. We're not deleting your Windows install, and we're not deleting any other disks. We're not letting the system itself select the disk and then select the wrong disk. So we'll immediately select the bootloader drive, and I'm going to select the drive we're installing to. If you select a different drive, it could corrupt your boot records, and you'll brick your other system. Here we are with the existing partitions deleted. With the existing partitions deleted, we can now begin adding new partitions one at a time. The exact size of the partitions down to the megabyte isn't exactly critical, but we do need certain partitions and certain relative sizes and minimum sizes. We are going to make a boot. The first partition we are going to make is a boot partition, and we are going to select FAT32 for this system, this partition. No, actually, my mistake. We are going to select ext4 for this partition and give it the mount point boot. With the boot partition created and the mount point given to it, the next partition will be the home partition. You want to put the home partition before the root partition and swap so that we can keep the home partition if necessary. If we have an issue, we can delete the other partitions on the edge of the disk, and this home partition will still be there. So you can still access the home partition. And you could also have only one partition for the home and the root, but then they're not segregated. You can't access one and not the other. So we are going to make the partition for home. We need to select the right size. The home partition is going to need to be the proper size. We need to subtract some sizes from the size of your current disk. You want to subtract the size of the root and swap, and it will give you the remaining amount you can supply to the home, because you want to have most of your space given to the home where all of your stuff is going to be located, and you want to have the maximum amount for that. It needs to correspond with the size of your drive and the size of the root and the swap subtracted from the size of your drive, and that will leave you with the size of the home. My disk is about 1 gigabyte today, so I have subtracted 100 or so gigabytes for the root, as well as 64 gigabytes for swap, because I have a full 64 gigabytes of RAM. The old recommendations used to give more swap. When RAM was more limited, we gave more swap. Now that we have lots of RAM, we need less. We don't need as much swap. But so this might be way excessive amount, but I'm going to give the amount of swap that corresponds with the amount of RAM I have. We're gonna give 64 gigs of swap for 64 gigs of RAM. That's probably overkill. If you're low on disk space, you could go so far as to leave out swap and see how it runs. Even uh, so, we're going to do the size in megabytes. We're going to do 800,000 megabytes. which will leave about 200,000 or two, 200 gigabytes, I guess, right? Okay. We have the size for home partition. We have the type as ext4 partition type. We have the mount point, which will be home. Next, we can create the root partition, and we can just estimate, let's see, 64 multiplied by 10246556 is the number of bytes in a 64 gigabyte swap. We can subtract the amount of megabytes is not critical. You're going to give swap 1, 3, 5, 6. This is the root partition. We are going to give it the space minus the swap to allow, however much space you can have remaining for your root partition, taking into account the swap. And we need to select the mount point of root, just the slash. You can see we have 63,999 megabytes left for swap partition. And use as needs to be set to swap area. Take one last look. We have the boot partition mounted, the home partition mounted, the root partition mounted, mount points set, I should say. The swap type is set with ample space for swap.
Trump's borders are in Texas, and he's ready to carry out Trump's campaign pledge to secure the border and deport undocumented immigrants, starting with criminals.
Let me be clear. There is going to be a massive state and local
Not all distributions have this step, but it wants us to have a reserved BIOS boot area partition of at least 1 megabyte. We're going to give it 128 megabytes and hope that this solves any issue.
Trained corrections officers can look from ICE's database and detain suspects arrested for other crimes for up to 48 hours if ICE wants to pick them up.
And this means we need to resize our swap.
I believe so. I believe we've been very busy. The immigration debate exploding in this county.
I was angry. I was actually very angry.
Where Patty Warren's 37-year-old daughter Rachel, mother of 5, was
We are recreating the swap to allow space for this one last partition. Linux Mint is requiring. It's not always the standard to have this partition.
Resist Trump's deportation plan.
We're not going to cooperate in any way in that effort.
Denver's mayor
We've made the partition.
believes that the county line
Let's hope it'll install next.